Welcome. Tonight we're really excited to introduce Madeline Schwartzman as a visiting artist that who has been jointly sponsored by both the 3D and the 4D departments. So I think that's been a really exciting collaboration. It's exciting to see the departments work together, and I think it points to some interesting synergies for future projects. But in the meantime, I'd like to introduce Madeline. Madeline is a New York City-based writer, curator, architect, artist, and troublemaker. She is well known for a number of things. Her book, See Yourself Sensing, is about the human sensorium and perception, and was written at a time before there was really a great collection of books about technology relating to the body, and at this point is being used as a textbook throughout the world for courses that deal in that realm. Following book See Yourself X is focused around the head and looking at sensorium and social art. And she is the curator of the show See Yourself X, which was at the Pratt Manhattan Gallery. She also teaches at Barnard College, Columbia, as well as Parsons, the New School, and has been running a number of interesting projects through residencies, through student work, and through her own studio. And I know she's going to get into it in a lot more depth, so I will just let Madeline take it from here.
Hello. So I always have way too many slides, and I go really fast when necessary. If I prefer to run out of time and go quickly than to have a few. Michael told me that somebody came with 2 slides, so you can multiply that by like at least 90 or maybe more. And then I also have like a mini introduction to what I do, since I'm still trying to figure out what I do. So it doesn't seem very easy when I give lectures to say, here's what I'm going to talk about. So I make a mini lecture and then a talk. And I'm going to start that and get into it. And in the order of the larger things, you'll see me talk about the books and show you some of the content, talk about some of my work, talk about student work, back to my work. So here we go. Anyway, those are the book covers. The one on the left is, your left is the older one. It came out in 2011, and this one was 3 years late and came out in December of 2018. I'm always playing around with all of my images. I'm actually a filmmaker. Nobody ever talks about that, and I kind of forget, but until I had twin children, primarily made films and videos. I know there's a couple of Korean students here, and that's artist Hung Koo Lee on the far side, and it's, I think, a famous model in Korea that's on the cover. And he was a graduate student, just like you are, in the US, and so he says, this is not my story, that he was riding the New York City subway and felt his hand seemed kind of small compared to some New Yorker next to him. So he went into a bar and he put shot glasses on his hand with water in them and augmented them and then created these series of helmets. So along with the introduction is some of the work I do, just introducing you to the general topic of body, technology, nature experiments. We'll get to that piece. This is a little bit of an image that is this is Jan Fabre, but I use it to explain how I feel we see the human body, which is we're still digging it out. We don't understand consciousness. We don't understand so many things, and yet we feel ourselves in ourselves and logical, but it's actually not true. Like, for example, brain science tells us that you have a much smaller percentage of knowledge of what the brain is considering, so that if on December break you're thinking of going to Korea or not, and you're like constantly obsessing over it, the brain has already decided. It's just not let you know that, and your conscious mind is going back and forth. So that really tells me that you're not getting all the information that the homunculus inside of you knows. Other things I do constantly is research. So this is the New York Times. It was a couple of years ago, an article came out that says you have smell receptors in your skin. And it's those kinds of things that blow my mind, like that you can, smell this surface without using your nose. It's not what we understand as smell. We understand smell through the nose. So I like to do really silly little drawings when I think things like that the way I could understand it is that you have a nose all over your body. And then I start thinking of work that I've put in my book, like Lawrence Malstoff, who is a project called Shrink. And I'm thinking, like, what is your body doing? If you're smelling all over and then you put plastic and you have this tiny environment, what happened to that sense? This is my book launch of See Yourself Sensing. I had brought my vacuum cleaner, and he sucked the air out of this giant plastic with it and hung there, and everybody thought he was going to die, but he says that it's really like a hug. A lot of my talk is about the kind of reversal of perception, and even on the level of students and teachers in universities. You've probably seen this somewhere. It's been imitated quite a bit, but to me it's an environment. Someone else might call it a performance or art. Another thing that influences me in looking at graphic data, I didn't say this today when I talked about face nature to the students that are here, but I'm looking a lot at stuff like this. So this is the biome, and plants take up that big green dot, and those are humans. So like we're on this planet with this massive amount of nature, non-human nature, and we take up this thing, but what we really do is we, kill it all, burn it, like we're doing in Indonesia and in the Amazon. Thank you. You're going to be my brain because I'm jet lagged from coming from New York. And so, keeping in mind, even as an artist, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I think is a little important. The idea that with 1.5 degrees of warming, 10 more million people will be exposed to permanent inundation and several hundred million more to climate-related risks, mostly poor people. I mean, again, there's this struggle. Should we listen to that when we're making weird art or not? I hover. And then just these ways that they say that it's true. Skipping around, this relates to what I just told you, free will, who's running the ship. Do you have free will? If your brain is only delivering to you a certain amount of matter, like that person in that nostril who's like running the ship. And then you think that you know your teeth, but like your baby teeth look like that. So like this monstrosity of humanness that we cover over by not acknowledging how weird we are. So a lot of my work is like stripping through layers of weirdness. Weirdness in my book is a good thing. Speaking of weirdness, this is Lee Griggs. He's an artist that renders these in CG. And kind of for me, I read these as like thinking about future humans. I don't have the answer to everything. I don't know what kind of way future humans would look like. Probably they're hybrids with fungi and stuff like that. And then still in the question phase of like what I look at is the future, this whole idea that we won't have a body. All these artists like Lorenzo Oggiano, and I just found out this cool guy who really works on the future when there's no human, just maybe human flesh in little biological packages, lives in Sardinia. Like maybe if you go to some remote place to live, you'll have weird ideas about futures with no bodies. And I like to do drawings of like, okay, well the brain's flying away, so that slowly maybe we won't have a body, our brain will be offloaded, and then there really won't be a brain. You all saw some of my face nature, or some of you, if you haven't been here, I'm here to do a face nature project, and it's a seasonal experiment, so that would be fall in New York. And it's just glued. And I hope this isn't weirdly offensive. It's maybe a collage. I don't think it's real. I don't think Chairman Mao ever went to see Marcel Duchamp's. Does anybody think this is fabricated? But I thought of it as like crossing cultures, that another thing I like to do is cross things over. So when I make my books, the reason I think some people like them is because most people in any one discipline have never seen them before. But it's very hard to be in different disciplines. You never develop all your colleagues in the same discipline. You never fit within all the hiring practices of universities, like 3D or sculpture. So there's a million things that you don't benefit when you're restless in like multiple disciplines, but then suddenly it benefits you for books. There's some of my student works. These are sophomores in college, maybe freshmen. Usually I don't teach upper level, and I'm mystified by all you graduate students. I've had workshops with you, but still different. And that might be, this is a video of a sense-based project. There's little pins in there, and there's some kind of inverse thing where when she pulls it down, maybe you're pricked, and when it goes up, you can see. So another, finally, this is like most people's lectures, but it's just my introduction. Advantages in cross-species meeting. Again, things meeting, professions, creatures, and that's something I like a lot. A pangolin. There's a fellow here from South Korea, who is making scales from the pine cone. And I was thinking about this when he was doing it. The pangolin is the most trafficked animal in the world. A friend of mine named Andy, you'll see later, sent me this on my birthday, knowing I liked hybrids and pangolins. Well, that's not far off from the pangolin keepers. These are a group of men in Zimbabwe who are protecting this creature. So suddenly there really is an image of this beautiful sort of hybrid. I don't know if the human is functionally getting anything. Certainly they're protecting each other. I think a world without some of these species is pretty crappy. We also have like fancy designers, Atelier XJC, they're in See Yourself X, who are then making the kind of scalar helmet more abstract, but still related to these creatures. I should also tell you that one of the Henrys in England had a suit of armor made of pangolins. So we've been killing animals for hundreds of years, stupidly. This woman is a fashion designer, Nicoline Liv Anderson, and she has the hear no evil in her hair. So someone like me would read this as human-animal hybridity, not as a cute thing for a fashion shoot. I'd be like, we need, these brothers and sisters in our head, and they might need us in the future. Now, I'm very nonlinear, so when I talk about pangolins, I talk about tongues. That's the tongue. Look at this picture. If you Google it, the pangolin tongue goes down to the bottom of the rib. So feel your rib now, and I think there's no reason we shouldn't imagine some things human different from how they are. I know there's two students that are working together on a tongue project for the face nature, which I'm pretty excited about. I recently tried to tie something to my tongue and move around a piece of nature, and the tongue is such a strange, amorphous muscle that it just sort of slipped right off. Speaking of tongues and hybrids, so some people cringe at this, but you've probably seen it before. Janine Antoni on the left, and Maurizio Catalan joking on the right. So what I like about this is the husband licking the wife's eyeball. She's an artist. I tried this last summer. You can try it with someone. And then I thought it was really funny that other artists take what other artists do and make fun of them by putting an eyeball in the mouth. And Maurizio Catalan, you may remember, imitated an entire art show opening up in London. He fabricated the artist's show. Karsten Haller had a show, and Maurizio Catalan, to the detail, imitated the show and built everything next door. And then when people came to the opening, they went into the wrong show, or they saw two shows. So I like the idea that one person's mean joke is another person's fine art. You can also use your tongue to lick your way through the world. People from China, how do you say this? Kang Xin. Did I say it right? His name, Kang Xin. He licks his way wherever he goes. I tried that on the right, got a little messy. And I mentioned to some of you the Onco mouse. This is a work by Tanya Blanco, again, a hybrid. It's about human futures and science. This is like a sort of science, human, maybe parts of maps or periodic tables. And the Onco mouse is the only patented creature. It was bred to have cancer. So as we're doing all this weird stuff and like looking the other way at things, we have to remember the values of everything in the world and all the creatures. I mean, I obviously weigh in on the side of many, many things, and all animals and creatures are important, but I can sometimes be perverse and, want to see a weird project. So there's gaps in my existence. Speaking of hybrids, this is like a school bus getting eaten by kudzu. We have a lot of kudzu in the South. So, and then this is a house by Marcel Breuer, so that an architect willfully takes an Airstream and jams it into architecture. This is like the weird flip side of the terror of things overgrowing you, or the joy of taking a machine and slamming it into a building. And then I start searching cars in buildings and find that there's some hybrids exist very willfully in both sides. They're not slamming into each other, but some have been strange confluences of just time and nature, and some are time and nature. Now, the next two slides, I have a trigger warning, but not on the next one, but on the next one. But this is something. I was walking on a road, my car was getting fixed, I had to walk 9 miles, and all around me, after reading the climate report, I was like, oh my God, they've closed off the Beaver way of getting under the culvert. Oh my God, there's this. This stupid little road in Massachusetts was like a terrifying thing for all animals in nature. And I couldn't believe that in the scale of one road, I could see all this. And on the way back, I finally got tired and asked a man for a ride. And he told me that right where I was, a motorcyclist had hit a deer, and which is exactly the kind of thing I was thinking about, how can these two things exist? How can we have roads with no places? And this, again, I'm not just being about power to animals or we have to change. I'm just looking at this kind of hybridity. So I found an image of a motorcyclist hitting a deer. In this case, the camera tells us that the deer got away. But I think a machine and an animal is very vivid. So I started looking up machines and animals. You can go on my weird head journey. And trigger warning, not at a certain point, my upstairs neighbor had an accident right next to our building. I heard it, and this is the scary thing that is revealed. Blanche, my 85-year-old neighbor, Holocaust survivor, had driven into the building. And so I'm just thinking there's some research project on these things slamming into other things, whether it's cars and buildings, animals and buildings. Now I go to the book after that weird prelude. So we start with See Yourself Sensing and the chapters. Each book has 5 chapters. Some are more normative, like tools are tools, but reframers are different. Reframers may take one sense and replace it with another. And speculations are in both books. They're like future things. Environments and tools stand for themselves. So they might look like this. Might look like a project by a Spanish artist, Jaime Pidarch. Almost looks like a one-liner, but they're beautifully made, and they make you think who would wear this, what happened to the brain, where's the nose and the ears. Oh, we still have ears, but maybe not a nose. To a pepper mill made of a nose that sneezes when you use it. To a prosthetic nose in London of the 18th and 19th century when you had syphilis and your nose would cave in. So you'd need this. This is actually somebody's prosthetic nose. And then there's even satirical groups from that period called the No Nose Club, which is like someone wrote a newspaper article on the No Nose Club where you'd go and meet, get dates with other people with no noses. Stellark with his third ear on his arm. Now it doesn't work anymore. It used to connect to the internet. He took 12 years to find a surgeon because surgeons won't really agree to do things like this. And now everybody wants a picture with his ear. So I thought it was really interesting that even when something doesn't work, it's important that you have the photo of the fake thing. And then practical things like the nasal ranger. If you live near a dump and you're starting to get irate because it smells more and more bad, you can buy one of these and test the saturation of the air and find out that they are working against the law. Also in that book we might connect with other species. This is Anthony Hall looking to connect to electrogenic fish. So what do artists do? They will build a whole little piece of architecture, fill it with technological equipment, and enact experiments. Scientists and artists, I'm reading the book about Alexander von Humboldt, and it's scary if you Google the 1800s, all of the scientists were like electrocuting themselves. And not just like in simple places, they were electrocuting themselves in private spaces to study things like galvanization. So the idea of an artist doing that now is fully legit. There's even a guy who's studying electrogenic fish at Harvard. We have the Romans used electrogenic fish as medicinal purposes. Then we have like Stellark's robots where you're maybe going to have less agency. Or if you have an office full of supplies, you might make a little kind of puppeted device for your head. Or if you're Daito Manabe, you are going to use the kind of internet to constantly show your experiments, like LEDs in the mouth. Anne Hamilton, way before you, when she was in graduate school, when I was, made a toothpick suit. All these things I think of as body sensory. They don't necessarily go together. Alphonse Schilling, a very well-known Austrian artist, made structures that made near, far, left, right, and back front because he didn't believe in monocular vision or binocular vision. So, you know, you're an artist, you have a principle, down with binocular vision, and then you spend your life using lenses to make these projects. And this fellow, Ong Kianpeng, made a mask that tells you if you're in a floodplain. So right now in Venice, this would be completely blue, since we hear Venice is flooding. Other things in the book, environments, Ernesto Neto with furniture that's like all bulbous. And one of you, I saw the beautiful black twisting forms that make me think a little bit about that, or wearables that become like tents in the wind. And then we are even well before the era we're in now with migrants as proliferated and, you know, terrible losses of people trying to move to safe places. This architect, Didier Fusa Faustino, spent his time making a case so that if you wanted to stow away in an airplane, they could, in the wheel, because many times, like, we'd find that Africans had, like, climbed into the wheel and set horribly, did not make it because it gets below freezing there. So the dark side of being an artist and making something that makes a political statement. So two pieces that are, like, physical, environmental, and light and dark in weird ways. Dunkel Kammerhut, Alphonse Schilling. It's a walking camera obscura. And Delusions of Self-Immolation by Eric Hobgen. So in the 90s, when you were in art school, you could use fire. Maybe never here. I always think, like, what happened to this world that we can't use, like, a flamethrower anymore? So you would get covered with gel, and you would literally get immolated for a quarter of a second, and then you'd flip around. Another poignant thing, we're finding, like, protests in Hong Kong. In my generation, when we grew up, it was Chinese students that were self-immolating. You'd see it on the news, somebody running on fire, and you'd just be, like, horrified and gripped. So what is it about the human capacity to both watch that and be horrified at the same time? Artists like Nicola L., a woman who was popular in the 1960s and then went away, like nobody heard of her, and I found her work and put her in my book, and then she said that I had brought her back, and now she had many shows after that. She recently passed away. She lived in the Chelsea Hotel, and she said that this collective piece, it was a performance piece, and if you wore it in Italy, they would think you were communists, but if you wore it in Brazil, they would think it was a party. So the perception of a piece like this just changes via color and context. Technologically, in this same sense book, if you took this electrode array and you had a video camera that looks like this on your head, and the darks and lights of the video camera went onto your tongue, you could see, because we found out through brain plasticity that you don't have to go through the retina to see. You can send things through the tongue, and they can go to the brain via the visual cortex. So how that's used is for blind people to see. It's actually marketed. And it's also used if you happen to go through a period in your life where you have no more proprioception and you can't tell which way is up. So mysterious things. My students at Parsons are making like a fake documentary, and they want this chair that makes this woman hallucinate. So I'm like, oh, use BrainPort technology. You have a chair with electrodes, and whatever is input on the electrodes, you would see, so they say. So a bunch of graduate students at the RCA, after the Brainport came out, tried to make lollipops with electrodes where you lick them and you'd see fish, because that was how it was programmed, which I thought was a great idea, and so did about 160,000 people who tried to buy it on the fake website, but it wasn't a real project. Moving to a little segment that I must tell you about, because when you write a book about the senses, you have to really think about how they work. So first of all, I grew up with the old black and white Dr. Dolittle. You probably grew up with the newer one, I think, with Eddie Murphy. And in the old one, we have eyeballs on that snail. But we know that snails don't have eyeballs, right? They have them on the ends of their thing. So culture tells us things. We have people that believe the earth is flat. It might be somebody in this room. I don't believe it. And then we have, though, the internet, Google, telling us when you look up highways, this is what they look like. So I'm wondering if we're spending so much time on the computer, might we then imagine these like rubber roads as what's real? And so I start to get blown away when I travel, and KLM has these like almost urine sample cups with an airplane flying by a windmill, or their, life safety stuff is on Delft tiles. So this is like that cross-cultural like picture of Mao with Marcel Duchamp. And also, I slightly rant about our current airplanes. Like, all the airplanes are disappearing in the culture of emergency safety. You're flying with just a chair. So if the airplane companies can be so fun and free, can we keep up with that? Might we fly like that? Now, do believe everything you think is like, okay, I can make a person with eyes on top of their head. I can look at the sensory homunculus, which right now I want you to think your butt and back are touching the chair, but this picture tells you that sensory-wise, it's your tongue and lips and hand that are the big things, and all those other things. I mean, like everything from the chest down just is nothing, and then your feet. So we are not who we think we are. We are not who we think we are when we date. Some people would say, according to the sweaty t-shirt test, which looks like this. They put a bunch of sweaty men's shirts in a little receptacle and had women smell them. And the women all picked the men who had different MCH genes. So that tells us that it wasn't how they looked or what they sounded like. It might be that your date that you really like just smells different because you'd have healthier offspring. Even if you never want to have children, how do you know that you're not like with a person just because of the smell? Along those lines, James Auger did a project. This is a blind date. Unfortunately, it doesn't read, but that's a wall. So instead of meeting the person, you smell them first, and the smell goes to the apocrine glands and tells you that, yeah, you're a match. Also, sensorially, we have the Margaret Thatcher test. Lovely Margaret Thatcher looks actually like this if you flip it around. So humans can't read distorted senses when they're upside down. So if you met someone at the beach and you said, oh, they look good, and then they were like, hi, how are you? And they stood up and they're like this monster. It just keeps undermining. I'm hoping to undermine reality for you a little bit. It's weird stuff. This is the weirdest one. I never explain it that well. Okay, so this is a person with a split corpus callosum. Normally, your corpus callosum is not split, and your brains communicate. That means that I better look this way, the left lobe is looking at the chicken leg, and the right lobe is looking at the snowy roof. And then the person picks cards, and I'll read it to you. It says, afterward, the man shows the most appropriate matches from an array of pictures visible to both hemispheres. He chose a chicken to go with the claw and a shovel to go with the snow. So far, so good. But when Gizanaga, the scientist, asked him why he chose those, the man had this answer. Mind you, because the corpus callosum is split, the right side of the brain can only see the snowy house, and the left side can only see the chicken leg. And he says, the chicken goes with the claw. Now, what does that mean? Here it says, you need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed. So the snow no longer was important, what the right brain saw, and the left brain dominated, and it was all about the chicken. This happens like when you go to court and you're a witness. Sometimes, why are you not a reliable witness? Because we still have that left brain, right brain kind of hierarchy that the left might change the story. So don't you know that you've changed the story in your life sometimes? And your friends say, don't you see what's happening? Like, it's so obvious, but you're like, no, it looks like this. So these are all the things, and this is another image of that, where the man can't see something, but can touch something. So moving along from that, these are two early studies. The left is Darwin, and the right is Duchenne de Boulogne. And this is what it looks like when scientists are trying to understand facial expression. They take, as I told some of you earlier today, people from an insane asylum that have no agency to approve of this, and then put electrical stimulation on their face and get these expressions. So we fast forward to this kind of VJ fellow from Japan, Daito Manabe, who DJ'd his friends. So they're not having facial expressions because they feel something. They're being controlled with electrical stimulation, which is sort of twisting things around. I'll let this run for a minute, and then I'll show you the end, where they regain their agency. Okay, so here's the end. It gets really heavy duty. They're really getting electrocuted. And then they become themselves again. So now we know things like about Botox. We know that if you Botox your forehead and you no longer frown, it has effects on your depression. But that if you Botox here and you no longer smile, you can get depressed. So there's these kinds of things need to coordinate, like science, art. We already saw this. So now I'm at the next book. This is not. This is about the future of the human head and our human head's extension into space. Similar chapters. Some are more regular, and some are when there is no head. Now this is about my only trip to Detroit. I was going to a book talk, and I was going to upstate New York, and we landed in Detroit, and as we're landing, we hit a bus. That's the bus. It was pretty scary. We were really going high speed, and the pilot had no idea, whereas everyone on the left side of the plane saw the bus, and everyone else felt it. And this was not the biggest thing in the world, but you get into a lot of trouble when you hit your wing and make a dent like that. So I went through the Detroit. You can try this. There's so many pilots. So I asked pilot one, do you feel the width of your wings? By the way, I was rattled, but not really. I was like, yeah, I'm going to give a talk. I'm going to talk about this. And then when we got out, and later, I was like, crap, I was just in a plane accident. And then I got like $200 back from Delta. I never spent it, though. How many times have you got money back from an airline and never spent it? That's all going into their pocket. The second pilot and the first do not feel the width of their wings. And no other pilot feels the width of their wings except this guy. He was 64, about to retire, and he was like, yes, I feel the width of my wings. So I did this little drawing with Jeff and made a little extension. And then I started looking at world beard and mustache winners and thinking about what it must feel like to have a child, for example, and say goodnight and poke them in the eye. But it made me want to connect to architecture. I do come out of a master of architecture, oddly. I'm not talking about it much, but I'm a licensed architect. That's really weird, because when I got licensed, there was 11% women, and to have one of them be me makes no sense. But I still renew it every year. Okay, so why don't we plug in beyond a plug? Why can't we plug our body in? So I looked at two hair projects. One is the longest hair in the world, this guy, Hans Langseth. And then on the left, an artist I really like, an interaction designer in London, Michael Burton. So that's a beard with a cricket in it, because in the future, when there's more problems with disease, you want to attract foreign bacteria. So you'll bring a cricket from far away to this cricket of the opposite sex, and therefore, hopefully, live a little longer. So Hans Langseth's beard was found It was over 17 feet long. He was from North Dakota, and it says his final wish was to have an open casket funeral. Wouldn't you have that if you had a beard like that? Anyway, somebody found it in a basement, and this is the joyous people in the Smithsonian Institution with his beard. Strangely, I think that the beard is opposite to what you'd think. At least one of the pictures I've seen shows that it's actually the dark part is the longer part. I still am working on that, even though she's holding it up. I mentioned Uzumaki today. It's a manga about a town, and there's a movie too in Japan that's haunted by a spiral. So again, a weird thing is normally you have monsters and bad people, but here it's a vortex, and the bitchy high school girl gets a 4-story hairdo, which is sort of like face nature. So that reminded me of Matthew Darley parodies of 18th century hair rolls. They're like, the parody is that they're so big you could have a battle in them, and the hairdressers need a sextant to see each other. And there are all kinds of things like affairs with the hair people because you were with them so long. But what I love most of all are these things. What are they? That's the only test of this evening. Anybody? No, that good idea. If you have a big hair, you should be able to shake and rattle. What else? Sex toys, early sex toys. Hi, I'm Madeline Schwartzman discussing early sex toys. No, what else someone said? Curler? No, good. These are such great answers. Why shouldn't you have your sex toy in your hair, for God's sake? I know why. So they're lice houses. They're lice catchers. If you're going to wear your hair for 7 days, you got to deal with the population. Again, that's a kind of nice thing. We used to give them houses. Now we eradicate them with horrible chemicals. Is this lecture making any sense to you? I hope. It's not to me, but I'm very sleep deprived. But this is the way my mind works. So we're connecting to architecture through this fashion image. For the second book, I appropriated fashion shoots right and left, like this one. It's a fashion shoot, but I thought of like, what about human mycorrhizal network, fungi, hybrid. And another person, same guy, Michael Burton, is thinking with Michiko Nita about having algae suits, just like that Soylent, right? The movie Soylent Green, but now you can buy Soylent and live on that. So why should we even go and eat? We should just have this suit. Okay, I'm going to make a segue to like data. So supporting this book are all this data. Like this is a Bertillon. He's a detective in France in the early part of the century, and he's managed to convince the entire police department that you can catch people because no two noses are alike. So all these detectives are studying the typical ears. But then they found twins, identical twins, that one of them did a murder, and they debunked this method. But I also think that it's funny that our sensory apparatus is sometimes used that way, and this is what you'd use if you were in the police. That same guy, Bertillon, invented the headshot. So it's like kind of mind-blowing that the thing that we see in the newspaper as all of the people in the administration today are going down and going to get their headshot would be related to this detective that's sort of this innovator. Some of the fingerprint did away with the nose stuff, but this is gruesome. This is one of the first images of an above view in photography. It's a murder. So a lot of the inventions of things we do and look at happen through utility because police people needed to document something. Now I segue back into connecting to architecture. Should the architecture come to you? This is an artist, William Cobbing, sort of having this strange portal to your belly. Maybe you can somehow tell it's like a sonogram, I don't know. And then our head flying off so that we walk into a gallery and we just have robotic heads that follow us because there's a sensor in the nose. And then we get the uncanny valley feeling because there's just these heads that are sort of wrong. And that same guy, Louis-Philippe Demers, made this project. You can pump up the volume so we have like a dance party. Yeah. So you have no agency. Everybody's robotically moved through space. This is really really poignant to me. It's a little bit like fake news and the elections in Russia. We're essentially puppeted. Can your art be that poignant? And I know 2 people here that could do this kind of thing. So maybe your brain is going to get squashed out as it goes, Lorenzo Oggiano again, on his way to a humanless future. You still have an eyeball and a little skin. And maybe like Kahn and Selesnik, these sort of romantic photographers, you get sent to Mars and maybe you regenerate a body. Now I go into my work. Are you still alive? Okay, how much time have I taken up? Okay, not all of my work is super crafted. I admit that. A lot of it is experiments. And I took an Arduino class before I went, backing up, I think it was playing. And I made this what I think of as like the rubber hand experiment. When you put this on, suddenly, even though your right hand's here, there's this new hand clasping you, and you sort of have a sense of comfort. So and that's cast resin. This came after this giant resin casting I'll show you, and it has glow powder in it. So at night, you can see your friendly hand. I showed you this at the beginning. And for anyone that was in the Face Nature talk, you know that I went to Thailand to an art and technology conference you might want to go to next year called Dynacon. The second one was in Panama, and that's where I met Michael Candy there. And I just brought alligator clips and chopsticks and ended up making this weird thing. We're riding on the boat. There was a boat that came with this conference. That probably won't ever happen again. And it was just shockingly spectacular. But like a day after this, there was a giant storm, the storm that toppled the diving boat and killed a lot of Chinese tourists. So there's tragedy in this area. And I'm working here, and I make this piece, and Michael, as you know, helps me to make 3D print the servomotor holders and all kinds of other things. And I make this set of swab out the nature, and just sort of inside of it, it's real nice, and you're connecting to nature. Outside of it, it's like they're eating me. And that's the development of leaf eyes. When you do this, when you look at leaves and nature, you start to see them and things everywhere, so that you're constantly enjoying connecting to nature, even in Madrid's little park. I showed you all this picture of the mycorrhizal network. It's the fungal network that connects plants in the forest, and those are 4 images, graphic images of the extent. If you look at the colors, those are trees, and it's extending out, and that's the World Wide Web, and the World Wide Web at its origin, connecting 3 little cities. So if it could happen to the web and it could expand like that, I think that something will happen to this forest network. A little bit about that you saw today. Just a nice image of what it looks like in the forest. So those aren't the plants themselves, they're fungi. And they're communicating. They're telling each other there's a blight. There's not enough water. The trees are dying, and they're feeding their little ones food through this network. And I don't know why I show this after, but you saw today that I have a habit of thinking about inhabiting nature on a kind of architectural way. So these are my practice, hedgetecture, I call it. It's a pretty good one. And the opposite of hedgetecture is garbage. But as you saw today in Zurich, I crawled behind the garbage. There's a chair in there I see now. And I disappeared into this hedge and had some tea. And you don't do this in Zurich. You feel really frightened when you're doing naughty things like this in Zurich. So I thought of this as home and garbage as not home, and tried to think of populations, maybe passing populations inhabiting them. It looks like calligraphy. And started this, along with this quest to sort of either preserve or capture nature. So in the architecture studio, it was using cabbage and this is Tenley's layering of plaster. For me, it was the disgusting, toxic dip it, taking nature and dipping it. They're still perfectly intact a year later. And then in Brooklyn, I went to a park and just did this on a fall day. And so this led to this practice that I am currently a year later still doing, where every time I see something on the way home from work or in a park, I collect it, and I usually put it on my hand and face, and I think a lot about why I'm doing it and what I'm learning about motion, things that I never knew. Some things I knew, and they don't tell me anything, but I still like them. I'm still thinking about these projects and what they mean. That's glued right on me. I'd love to have a whole suit like that, walk around with nothing on. Repeat. Slow motion on some. And holly, pointy holly. So slow motion, it's like a lever arm, right? It's just extending the finger, just shows what the potential is for longer fingers and movement. In Panama, there's just nature everywhere, and it's falling every day when it rains. So I'm turning the hand, and people would say, like, oh, that's trippy. Like giving the hand agency. On the way, this is what it looks like to do this in the mirror. This is one of these is in Europe, and the other is in Florida over December. That one where I feel like I look too chic. More trying on the face. Sometimes you just get tired and you can't do the whole face because, like, you have to take care of your children and cook dinner. And I'm torturing my children lately by, like, them showing up home and I'm covered in face nature when they're, like, really angry. It's kind of a good thing. So, okay, we're almost done with face nature. We go into student work a little more. Uncanny things about humans and nature that I'm still working on. Changing, like, kind of gendery things where I turned into my friend Dan by accident, who has a beard. This is like Duchenne de Boulogne and Darwin, just like putting something measured on your face. I know it's obvious that this could happen, but it's not obvious the sequence, right? These are things you don't really know. Sorry about that. Am I going backward? Lichen. Some things you can't move very fast. The next one looks photoshopped, but I guarantee you it's all on my face. Just like undoing and reconstructing a flower. And the nose gets weirder and weirder. As I showed some of you, I was in Eindhoven about 3 weeks ago. That was outside of my hotel. I collected them, laid them out in my room, put them in the sink, did a quick one, not super crafted, but a bit kind of fashiony. Next night, another one on my legs. And then when I got home, it was this season, which is just about 2 weeks ago. And this one, that was my Halloween costume, but I actually thought it had resonated beyond Halloween, so I did another one, which maybe still is sort of Halloween. Here today I talked about not applying directly to the face, but of course I do. And then I did this one, which I really like. I've been recruited by the Muppets for this one. This is a ornamental cabbage that I purchased. Now, what's really weird about this is when it starts, all the leaves are the same, but the second I start moving my mouth, that top one becomes like a weird beak. So, like, just movement turns the face into something that we recognize. I think I frowned too. So that brings you up to date. Today, when I was confused because everybody was all over the place and I couldn't find you, and I saw that the fellow or woman who brought in the icicles, and out the window in front of me was a beautiful triad of icicles, I made this. So I quickly made a structure because no one else was using the Dremel. And it seemed like an opportunity. And I get tired of working in my bathroom, so it was like a studio. All those pictures are in my bathroom. And so this has audio, but for some reason,
Okay, now we have
oh,
to
there we
move
go.
the counterweight. Somebody
So
grab
I
the
put a rock in the back to hold it up, and
it's in my back.
they pulled
How
the
does that
rock.
look?
These guys were super nice to me.
Yeah, lower it down. Okay.
It hurt my nose.
We got it.
Good?
Yeah.
Wow!
And then I walked around and dripped on all of you
How is it?
It's great.
afterwards. Okay, now a little bit more work and then student work and we'll be done. So I started to look at sunflowers in Massachusetts and I started casting them in resin. I'm seeing beautiful stuff in your studios that are cast in weird foamy stuff and phalluses and things that are very interesting. But I was casting sunflowers and putting glow powder in. And this is all because, well, later you'll see I was doing this with somebody named Andy Quitmeyer. But after that, I started making dresses and thinking about making them robotically move, like this little device, which some of you could do, but I said, nah. So instead, there's also me, like, making them into a bikini like Madonna. So I started making these glowy dresses with those, and then I made a bigger dress. I'm wearing, like, a top that is for, like, some game kids play. And I thought it was interesting that when you put this on, you disappear, but the dress remains. So this came from this project. This is Andrew Quitmeyer, who runs the Dynacon conference, and those are his projects with ants. You know, if you pee on paper, the ants will pick it up. So if you go to Panama, remember to pee on the paper. And we had never met, and we were talking about doing work because I was a curator, and I'm like, if I'm going to do that hard work, I should curate myself. So I asked the guy that runs the Pratt Manhattan Gallery. He said, yeah, curate yourself. So I said, Andy, do you want to do it? I said, I'm picturing nature on a dry cleaning conveyor. And he was probably thinking, yeah, you're going to really find a dry cleaning conveyor. So we started casting nature, either on site, as some of you are doing with silicone. That was like my first leaf. And he was like, don't start big. But I did, of course, because I'm disobedient. And these are what the leaves started to look like. The green one is just the glow powder. And these are some of the things. So he was casting in Southeast Asia. And this is my casting studio in Massachusetts. And here's my castings. His are much prettier because they're tropical. And he had a better drone. I just had a camera in my hand. So like people with drones have the advantage, the documentation advantage. So he's looking down from an apartment building. And together we were going to meet and bring these leaves together. And so I managed to procure 2 dry cleaning conveyors from a defunct dry cleaner. As it turns out, these machines are built to last forever. They hadn't moved in 20 years, and there were 2. I bought them for $200 each. They're absolutely beautiful. And this is the result of the 1,000 leaves we cast. These are the different variations. There were multiples of each one. And when we came together with the 2 dry cleaners, this is what it would look like, sort of irradiated in the gallery. And depending on the light, if it was darker, it would look real pretty with a better camera. And then sometimes it looked kind of cheesy and pink. And they had a kind of rhyme and reason. The dry cleaner also gave me that device. And you'd pick it up, and there was a long-range FID on the tag. And if you went in, the RFID, and you went in, the dry cleaner would supposedly stop according to that leaf, which it didn't really. It would stop by motion sensing because we ran out of time. And that's what it would look like. Oh, sorry, those were the pictures. And so at the Panama Dynacon, I made a kind of construction that I then first was mechanical, and there's also a motor, the thing that I'm putting on my face. And it's pouring like that. I'm in the back of the house. But the jungle is just too big for a single piece of work. So I knew I had to have video. So I photographed butterfly wings microscopically and made this installation. There's 3 mechanical pieces I moved between. And I might have cut the video short. Oh, maybe well, in any case, it's kind of exciting to make something more jungle-like. Okay, just briefly, this is See Yourself Exist that was talked about by Carla. These are the projects. The discussion was that nature does not speak human, but we try to do that. And there were baby bears that you should have in your apartment because in the future we have to steward nature. And Shoes with Teeth on Them by Fantich and Young. And Nobumuchi Asai and face tracking, which is a very expensive process right now, but I imagine people in the future walking around like this all day. somebody made a protest device in Hong Kong that was like that. That's Michael Candy's project. That's how I met him, I think, by curating him first. This is the cycle of a Lunamoth, little robots. I also curated in Irvine another show that had futuristic animals. Here's what my student work looks like. So teaching is sense-based. The books came out of this project. These were analytical devices that connected one or more senses. Over there, that one is a really beautiful tongue project by someone who never built anything but had like genetic disposition to make like robot units. And then all of these have a sensory thing. This is a simple one, seeing out of your hand, with motors that change the orientation of the mirrors. But these are like kids that don't really know how to use this stuff. We saw Dr. Dolittle, so students would make Dr. Dolittle-like projects, or ones that look like things that maybe you would have on your window, or exploring like what is this weird human orifice that taking so long to get to it makes you think like, wow, a mouth is really weird. Like a sea lamprey. Or others that are more like conceptual. On the upper left, she's saying I and me.
Press the orange one because these won't go down.
This woman's trying to sequence the senses with Lego motors. Other cute ones moved by the hand.
My project, like on a personal level,
These are architecture students, mind you.
my
So
hands
for artists, they might look utilitarian, and for architects, they look weird. A little umbrella for the hand. It's hard to build things that pull intention out of wood, and other little machines the college students do. Book performances when we engage in book projects. Columbia students, Barnard students, and then new books, new style books. These are like things that were meant for the New York City subway that were expandable books. And here they are going to the critique on the subway with their constructions, and this is one of them. That's one of the guest critics. This is another one. She's delivering a book to a stranger.
And then when you're done, or I have to leave the subway, I can roll this back in, and I can leave.
And somebody's like being a book. You could read her back or her front. That's my TA. And this guy's a German student. He won like Germany's top academic prize, and you could see he's sort of ambitious. He went to a hotel and got a tremendous amount of cloth and made this giant train installation. So Face Nature looks like this. Some of you are doing it today. This is where I ask students to engage closely with nature, and it has some kind of magical consequence, if I like to think. And we're playing around and using servo motors. This is in recently in Eindhoven. A person, a businesswoman who came to the workshop and got really hardcore. And that finally, another project I don't talk about all the time, but I do since 2013. Most times when I ride the subway, I ask a stranger to write a poem. So this was an article in the Wall Street Journal, and this is one of my favorite poems. Spush cacao is a word no one knows, not even I. I'm guessing it's a sharp rock that never ends. Spush cacao. She was 7, one of my first people I asked. And here's a dopey PBS following me around.
I'm doing
just
a
for a
project
minute.
called 365
Raise
Day
that up.
Subway Poems by New Yorkers.
You can
write about your life,
make the audio louder.
That's because on every single trip to and from work since last spring, Madeline asks fellow commuters to write a poem in her notebook.
I look for people that have this quality of openness.
Oh, really?
I'm hustling
I can
him.
completely recognize who is sort of free to write a poem and almost who can write.
That's
I
true.
can prove
And
that.
I'm going to stop and end with one of my favorite poems, and because we're near Flint, Michigan, this resonates even greater. This is a physical trainer and a writer, and he's absolutely brilliant. This is the second poem he wrote with me while we rode around. I first met him at like 12 degrees at midnight. I was waiting for a group of like subway flex dancers, you know, that like do all this weird stuff, and they like kept me waiting for 2 hours, and I saw him and I asked him. So here's the final slide, plus 2 last ones.
The weight of simple questions or the dark star gravity of tiny hands is enough to choke on and beat back the burn in your own eyes. To be black is to consider the untimely death of your children. There is no language for why a life matters. Its logic is warmth, the way one hand can curl and leaf blindly around another. A brown finger stuck in a bramble of hair, eyes, laughter squeezing the ribs, hurt so thick it makes the day slow and heavy and wordless. What does it cost me to explain my life to you? To find acquittal for my breathing, to plead for water, to question the nature of my love and pain in hope to better answer your own? What should it cost when we pay in children, in years? Simple questions, tiny hands, enough to choke on and beat back the burn in your eyes and sometimes find yourself silent and shaking.
That's Chappelle Mallard. So this is my wish for us here when we're working together and in general, that we form some big thought umbrella. Let's see tomorrow. I hope we do. And I forgot to say thank you so much, Carla and Scott, for inviting me. 3D design and 4D design. It's so much fun to come to a new school. And I can't believe it, but I didn't remember to bring any books. So if you'd like one, you can order them. And I do keep a very weird active Instagram that you'll probably all be on very soon, and a pretty active Facebook. And that's the end. Thank you.